Well, good morning, all, and welcome to the first Women in Credit Insurance event, which is a My Story webinar. The whole idea of Women in Credit Insurance was started by Sarah Morrow, the CEO of Allianz Trade in the UK, to really increase the representation of women in the industry, to act as a sort of mentorship and support network, but also to give training and guidance to women in the industry. So today's webinar is going to be actually focused upon 4 successful women leaders in the industry, and they're all going to tell us their stories and how they got to their positions in their organisations. The panel today really is pulled together to try and inspire the younger generation of women in the industry, and by sharing their journeys and their personal experiences, we're hoping that this will shed some light upon how to progress in the industry, how to attain senior positions in different organisations. We're also hoping to sort of inspire a bit of a wider dialogue, really, also in terms of how women can grow within the industry and how we support women to develop their careers professionally in different organisations. So we'll start off with introductions. Obviously, I should introduce myself as the moderator. My name is Richard Webster. I'm presently the non-executive director of Atradius Credit Solutions, but was formerly CEO of Hewlett Hermes in the UK, now obviously Allianz Trade. And I also worked for AIG in their global credit business before COVID started. I've been in the insurance industry on and off for 20 years, but have a general background. I'm actually a chartered engineer by background many years ago, so have experience outside the insurance industry as well. Today, my job is to act as moderator. That's going to be allow the ladies to introduce themselves and go from there. And then in terms of asking a few questions, and we've had some questions in from some of the people who are attending the webinar, so we'll ask those as we go along. The idea is this will take approximately about an hour in terms of the discussion, but we'll see how things progress in terms of questions and discussion. So if I can ask the first of the ladies to introduce themselves, that is Marty van Velsen. So Marty, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. Well, Marty van Velsen, a Dutch national based in Amsterdam. Been in credit insurance all my life and in Atradius all my life. So unlike most in London, I haven't moved much. I'm currently leading the global unit where the multinational customers in Atradius find their home. I love people and I love good conversation. I feel privileged that I'm able and allowed to travel the world to meet my teams and our customers and brokers. Next to leading global, I'm the business sponsor in a large business transformation program in Atradius, and the co-chair of a customer excellence team. And in all those roles, my ability to build bridges and reaching out comes in handy.
So now we'll move on to Anna. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Richard. I'm Anna Dieguez, and I'm Head of Global Clients for Aon Credit Solutions business in the UK, as well as co-leader of the business unit. A little bit like Marty, I've also spent my entire career in credit insurance, started over 20 years ago, and that whole time I've also been at Aon. So have found that the role keeps remaining interesting for me, which is why I've stayed within the industry, mainly because I think of my love of people and building relationships, which for me is what my work is all about. So looking forward to sharing experiences with the rest of these wonderful women on the panel.
Thank you. Angela, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to the discussion today. So I have a little bit of a different background from Anna and Marty. I started out at a small property casualty insurance broker right out of university. I then transitioned into their multinational practice. And from there, I encountered the specialty lines, including trade credit and political risk. And I decided after a few years that I wanted to specialize in the credit lines. So I moved to Marsh. So my experience has been from the small broker side to the large broker side, the property casualty side to the specialty line side. And currently, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Credit Specialties at Marsh. And so in that role, I help set and execute our global strategy in conjunction and partnership with our global head, other credit specialties leaders, and also other leaders at Marsh.
Thank you. And last but not least, as we say, Özlem, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Richard. Good morning. I'm Özlem Özdiner. I'm heading up finance and operations at Allianz Trade within e-commerce line of business. E-commerce is a new line of business, which is quite exciting for an insurance company to embark into. I have started my career in banking, did around 14 years with HSBC, then moved to Euler Hermes as their CEO in Turkey, which was a role I took on for about 9 years. And since the last 3 years, I'm in the UK. Previously as commercial director for UK and Ireland, and since October, head of finance and operations for e-commerce. And I'm looking forward to a very lively debate today with these wonderful women.
Thank you. So we've received a number of questions from participants in today's webinar, but we also had some preset questions which the ladies have managed to prepare themselves for. So we're going to start off with some of the preset questions and move on to maybe some of the questions that have been sent in by some of the attendees at the webinar today. I suppose the first question we had, when we had a little bit of that in terms of your introductions about yourselves, but I suppose what we really want to understand is, what challenges have you had in your career, specifically maybe relating to you being a woman in the industry, and how did you overcome those obstacles? So who would like to take that question first?
I'm happy to answer, Richard.
You,
the biggest challenge I had to overcome is myself, because in not self-censoring myself in meetings, thinking it through so long that by the time I was ready to speak, a male person in the room had already spoken and basically took away with my idea. So I think that has been the biggest challenge, to dare to speak and to sit at the table and be heard. And luckily there were enough men around me that basically also pushed me a little bit to speak, but to overcome my own censorship was my biggest challenge.
I think that's really interesting, Marty, because I think my immediate thought when Richard said that was actually it is myself as well, and for me slightly different. I think in terms of career progression, I think it's something that we kind of resonate with in terms of other women in this group, is that one of my challenges has been the confidence in myself to take the next role and to be ready. And I think that not so much on censorship, because I was always quite willing to speak up and give my view, which probably some people might have wished at times I hadn't, but that's never been a barrier for me. But I think certainly self-esteem is something that I feel is something that I've suffered more personally as a woman, and I do see it in other women in my team as well. So something to be self-aware of, I think.
Would any of the other members like to comment on that? Yes.
I would, to echo a little bit of Anna and Marty. I think one of the other challenges that I faced is, sitting there and waiting for the right opportunity, and the right opportunity has to be 100% perfect. I have to 100% meet all of the qualifications. And as I would look around sometimes in my career and see others progressing, I thought, well, what are they doing that I'm not doing? I must need to do more. And really, it was about having that confidence and raising my hand and being challenged to speak up and say, this is what I would like to do. This is where I would like to grow. And then finding those advocates and those sponsors in the organization that could help me get there. And so I believe it's also a little bit of taking that step forward and not think that you have to be perfect and ready 100% of the time in order to take that next challenging position, because otherwise the only position that you're qualified for is the one that you're currently doing. So we need to be a little bit more confident and ready to push ourselves forward.
Yeah, I would just add to that to say that in some parts of my career, I did take a step back myself, although I was offered maybe a role that I thought was too big for me to take on. If I look back today, I would have jumped into it and, make some mistakes, but learn through the process. So it's at times that we hinder ourselves from progression because we want it to be perfect. That's a woman trait, I guess.
Just on sort of expanding that point, I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, don't you, these days? Seems to be quite a popular discussion point. Is that sort of something which is almost related to not seeing other role models and therefore not feeling as confident, or I mean, just teasing that out as a discussion, that you feel you do self-censor because the environment is a theme there to some degree, or is that not the case?
No, I don't think it was the imposter syndrome I was suffering from. It was simply that I wanted to all my answers to be perfect and
It's
to be
perfection,
thought through,
yes.
and to be relevant. And I was constantly thinking during meetings, is this relevant? Is this relevant? And because but so it was not so much that I did not believe that I was in the wrong position, or that I couldn't do, or that I was indeed a bit of a fraud in that role. It was just the thinking it through too much instead of just daring to speak up. And well, even if it were to be wrong, also be able to stand up and be wrong from time to time.
Yes, yes.
And I think we also, we're constantly thinking about, am I liked? Am I smart? How do I come off? And so there's this constant sense of how you look in front of others. And so echoing some of Marty's comments, is it's not just about, am I confident in order to raise this idea or to challenge this idea in a meeting, but we're always thinking, or I think frequently, am I going to be liked after this? Or I need to make sure that I am collaborative and seen as friendly, because our leadership style may be different. And so not that we see ourselves as frauds or not ready, but I think there's an extra bit of challenge for us when we're sitting around at a table, especially when we might be the only voice that sounds the way that we do. How do we make sure that we're coming off as confident and inquiring and thoughtful, but sometimes we're also thinking and likable?
Yeah. So, I mean, the second part of the question was to sort of talk about how you overcame that obstacle that obviously you saw this self-censorship, and maybe you haven't, you may say you're still dealing with it to some degree or not, but if you're giving advice to others who have that, feel that they've got to be 100% perfect, using your phrase, Marty, what would that be?
I think one of the things I would say to women who might be feeling that is just to have a level of self-awareness. I think having a level of self-awareness to know that actually it's not unusual for women to have this sense of needing to be perfect, and perhaps having a fear of not wanting to make mistakes. And I think having allyship's a word that we use quite a lot, but I think it's really important if you have a network of women around you, of role models, of women who might be in roles more senior to you, that you can have a conversation with and share some of these feelings with. Because inevitably, quite often, when we're at earlier stages in our career, we might see senior role models that are female, and I remember thinking, well, I'm not going to be that person. That woman is perfect. She's got it all nailed. She's kind of, that there was sort of this sense that you had to be a certain way to be a female leader. And I certainly wouldn't have put myself in that category. And yet here I am today. And I think for a lot of women, it is about, I think, recognizing that actually that there is no trait to being a female leader in the same way there isn't to being a male leader. There is no one size fits all. We all lead in very different ways. Some are more confident than others. Some like to speak out. Some are more thoughtful. I think that we have to dispel this sort of sense that perhaps there is you have to be super driven and super ambitious and go to every networking event, and you have to have your brand, and you have to be super active on social media. I think we create this sort of sense that there is this perfection in female leadership. And what I'd say is that, we're all very different, but we're all very talented, and we're all very good at our jobs. So just, you don't need to be a certain way. I think just be confident in yourself as much as you can.
I do agree with Anna, and I think I read somewhere recently that it was an article about Yellen at Yellen. So the Congresswoman Yellen was interrupted more than any other woman during her tenure, not only by men, but also by women. So having an equal share in the table is quite important, because you drive strength maybe from your colleagues. And what I really think is that we need to be more advocating women representation, equal representation. we do still represent a fairly low share among our institutions. I think it was only last year that we had a woman CEO at Allianz Trade. Head of region was a woman. My own CEO, Sarah Muro, was a woman, and I was a woman as commercial director. And that was, for a long time, something that we hadn't had in the company. So, really walking the talk is also quite important.
I think that's a really good point. And it's not only about what can we do to get through some of the barriers that we have for ourselves, but how can we find advocates around the table who are going to help make sure that we're not spoken over at meetings, that we're not interrupted, that we might be invited to share a point of view because we might be sitting there thinking, what's the right time to raise my hand and say something? So I think it's a partnership between allies at the table, whether they be men or women. It's also something inside ourselves that we need to be sure that we break through. But I want to make sure that everyone listening to the webinar today understands that it's not just about fixing women. It's about how do we make sure that together in partnership with others, we create an environment where we're able to share and participate as fully as everyone else.
No, it's actually interesting because one of the you sort of spoke about the fact that this self-censorship was to some degree your biggest obstacle, but what external obstacles would you say? I mean, one of the questions is, what was the biggest barrier to your career progression in the industry? I mean, what would you say as an external obstacle in terms of that? I don't want to feed you an answer, but what's your view of things that need to change or have created obstacles, and how have you maybe overcome those?
Yeah, I didn't have that many obstacles. At least I haven't seen them as obstacles. They may have been there, but I may have been totally ignoring them. I've simply been very lucky with my bosses. So even when I was appointed in a leadership team role, allowed, that's a bit of a strange word, but basically were perfectly fine for me to have 2 daughters in that role and go away on maternity leave for a little while and come back actually fully and back and almost stronger back than I left on maternity leave. So there were no real barriers to me in that sense, but they might have been there. But then again, this is the Netherlands. I'm not in the London market so much. When I see that from the outside, I think there's far more a old boys kind of feeling. When I see all those brokers standing in Leadenhall Market having drinks together, I always feel a little bit like, how would I fit in there? So my environment was slightly different.
It's interesting you should say that, Marty, because we discussed in the pre-brief about the impact maybe of career breaks in terms of because of maybe commitments to obviously maternity and have children and so on and so forth, and how that impacts, and some degree that we spoke about that sort of old boys network and that drinking culture, that golf playing culture, and is that an issue as well? So again, throwing it out to the panel, what's your views?
I mean, as an outsider, because I'm coming from Turkey, and I joined the UK teams during COVID, so we didn't have too much opportunity for broker drinks. But it's about your adaptation. Of course, you don't need to really do the same, but it's about interaction, getting the network in place. So I didn't feel out of place when I came to the London market. I did feel some obstacles, though, when I was in banking, because there was a kind of a figure that's designed that you have to be very assertive. You have to be quite, I don't know how to put it in words, but if you are soft-spoken and if you have a leadership style that's more of a servant type of leadership style, that was not encouraged. So you were kind of you were asked to be a bit like a male person, although you are a woman. So that has changed now. I can see that among a lot of colleagues that work in the banking sector. But this is something we do. If we say we don't face any obstacles, maybe we adapt ourselves too much to the designed model, and we lose some of our authenticity, which is something I do see in a lot of women. They feel like they have to behave in a certain way because that's way maybe the company culture, or that's the way it's designed in that sector, for example. I don't know what others think about this, but I did feel that at times.
I think that it's really important to, as we think about what does it look like for a woman in a leadership position is those that are in the hiring positions, taking a look at their data. So even though we might be thinking about, do obstacles exist? Well, no, obstacles don't exist. We always hire the right person for the right job. Or when I looked around, there weren't any women around, or it just so happened that they left the industry and perhaps they never came back. I encourage everyone to look at the data, especially hiring data, promotion data, retention data, and really challenge yourselves to see whether or not there is some preference or there might be some unconscious bias that the data can't explain. So again, I go back to there are some things that we as women can do, but there are some challenges we need to embrace ourselves as leaders and hiring managers to make sure that we're not perpetuating an environment where it's more difficult for women to leave and come back, where it's more difficult for women to be promoted through the system, perhaps to be hired, or even with retention. And I'll say that I had a really great networking event a few weeks ago with some women in the London market, and they still mentioned that a lot of the events revolve around activities that tend to be more male-centric, whether it's shooting, golfing, other types of sports environments. So I do think there is something for us to think about is when we're putting together networking events, what time of day are they at? What activities do they revolve around? Are we making sure that they're inclusive, whether it's for men or women that may have responsibilities outside of the workplace or other constraints in their time?
Yes. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add a few words because I agree with you, Angela, because the barriers, I never felt them because I had a Swedish boss who was anyway pretty modern in that sense, but is to basically take out any practical things, I had once someone who was a mother and found it exceptionally difficult to deal with school holidays. And I was like, well, we can plan for that. So if you basically reduce your hours during the year by taking off the school holidays where you need to be at home, that can actually be very well scheduled. We know when they are and you can continue to work. So why lose talents from our industry by not being a bit more pragmatic in taking out those very simple obstacles, by not assuming that everyone is available every evening or many evenings and I think that most men would also not mind being spending a bit more time with their families. It's just that this culture might be that they have to be seen somewhere else. So I think by naming it and just mentioning it, that it's a bit silly to not be pragmatic here has been what I've been doing over the past years. The time in which we have children to raise is so short in the span of a lifetime and a working life. We should not lose anyone over that.
Okay. I mean, we've spoken around the issues of maybe slightly unconscious bias, maybe obviously it is very explicit discrimination. I know one of the questions we've got is that from one of the attendees is what's the most shocking example of discrimination in your career and how did you handle it? I know we have one or two examples. Now, Angela, you discussed one of those earlier when we had a conversation. Would you like to share?
Sure. Yes. And I think I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as a flagrant example of unconscious bias, but it was something that was very formative to me. Early on in my career, I was in an organization where most of the sales personnel were men, actually all of them, and the women were the account managers. And so in the Monday morning sales meetings, we would get together in the boardroom to plan out what sales do we have, what challenges might the teams be facing, how can we solve that together. And the boardroom table, all of the men sat around the boardroom table and the women literally sat on chairs encircling and around that table. And for me, coming into the industry very young, I looked at that and thought, why are we not sitting at the table? Literally, there are no women sitting at the table. And we were expected to sit there and take notes and listen and learn rather than to contribute. And so for me, it's been really important that I held that as I don't go to meetings if I'm not expected to contribute. Sometimes that's been challenging for people who have invited me to a meeting or are expecting me to sit there. And I don't necessarily mean that contributing means arguing or always dissenting or sitting there and saying, yeah, that's a good idea, and being very agreeable as well. But I always challenge myself that if I'm going to be invited to a meeting, I have to understand why, and make sure that everyone else is aware that I'm coming as a thought leader, as a contributor. I'm not going to come and just sit in a meeting. There may be rare times where that is the case, but it's not something that I've made in my career a consistent habit. So that's something that was very important to me, and still to this day is that I'm going to show up at a meeting and have something to say.
Okay. Does any of the other panelists have an example of something that maybe they found a little bit shocking, or behaviour that has maybe ceased now, but they noticed at some stage in the past?
I think I remember one that was about my maternity leave. So I had a boss who had to manage a team of women leaders. And coincidentally, myself and another colleague were pregnant at the same time. So he had a slight comment about, that timing of this is not very fortunate. At the time, I didn't feel really discriminated, but when I think of it today, it's such a very strong discrimination behavior. Maybe we realize this more now because it's a topic that is very key to women and men leaders. And we have progressed a lot about, what is the maternity cover that the woman has to take. It's an important part of their life, like Marty was saying. It goes by so shortly that you have to respect, and you have to make sure that the person does not lose anything from their career progression because they have gone away for maternity leave, right? So yeah, that's something that I realized today that was a discriminative comment, Richard.
Okay.
Yeah, I may want to add, not very much, but more, you can also sometimes make jokes about it when it happens. And early on, I was always the one pouring the coffee for whatever reason. And I basically said, always jokingly, I'm so happy this is apparently in my genes, that everyone understood what I meant. So sometimes you just have to call out a little bit, but not in a very angry way, but just basically make everyone aware that it's not normal that I should be the one pouring the coffee or serving the drinks in a meeting.
Yes. No. Well, humour is a good tool, isn't it? Sometimes to make a point. So, though I was once accused of having too much of a humour blanket to deal with issues. So you've got to be careful where and when you use it these days. So yes, no. So we've sort of spoke about the issues and the challenges in the industry, but I know one of the other questions that we asked you to look at was in terms of where you got your inspiration from and who maybe inspired you and sort of helped you on your way to where you are now in the industry. Would you like to maybe give us a little bit more detail on that, and where who were the people who inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of share. I think certainly from an early age, my parents have been massively influential in my life and my career decisions. I think they were very driven individuals. They had an amazing work ethic, and that's something I was just always surrounded by. And I think working really hard and always trying to make the most of the opportunities that I've been given was something that they kind of instilled in me really from an early age. So I think that's sort of been the bedrock, I think, certainly for me in my career. And then I think sort of when it's come into actually being within the credit insurance industry, I've actually felt really fortunate because I think I sort of stepped into the global client segment sort of probably about 15 years ago. And throughout that time, I felt in the global client segment, there always were, women like Marty, for example, in this call today, there was always sort of strong female leaders in that segment. And I think that really never made me feel like there was a barrier to me progressing, particularly in global clients. I think there is, if I look at the three largest insurers in our market, two of the senior roles in that segment are both women when it comes to global clients, and I'm a female in that area as well. So I feel that I've been surrounded by lots of inspirational women throughout my career, but also, and I think Angela mentioned it, really inspirational men that have supported me in making quite important decisions and taken more time, I think, with me than they probably needed to with my male counterparts. So something which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about later. But I think there's a huge role for people managers, whether you are male or female, just in identifying women who maybe aren't always sort of throwing their hat in the ring, because that's something that I felt really, really has made a huge difference in my career. And I think it's something that we all need to be very aware of. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think similar to Anna, I would say my parents would be my inspirations. My father was an army officer and my mother was an environmental activist. So that was quite an interesting marriage because, my mom had to respect what my father had to do and my father had to do the same for her. And I really liked it that they created a certain space and respect for what passion each one had. And I did probably, catch some of that when I started my own career to say, if you have colleagues, men or women, you have to respect that different opinion. And it's also a richness to have diverse minds, right? When we talk about diversity, it's not only diversity of gender, it's also diversity of minds, which enriches a company. And this is what we are striving for today, to have as many diverse people in our organizations as possible. And we get inspiration from all genders, all types of different people, all nationalities. I think having different cultures in an organization is also very helpful to understand each other. We are serving a wide range of sectors, different countries, different companies. So that helps to understand the other point of view and also enrich our brain and enrich ourselves. So it's where we are going is, I think, quite optimistic. I am, and I feel quite privileged to work for multinational companies that allows us to do this.
Angela, Marty, have you got inspiration from somewhere?
Yeah, a bit boring. My mother, I think, has been the most inspiring to me. I didn't see it at the time, to be very honest, because she was kicking me a lot to be educated. And I can tell from time to time I hated it because she was so fierce there. But she also taught me that I was allowed to be there. I was very welcome when I finally arrived in their lives, and to always speak up if I do it respectfully. And that helped a lot. And my father, because he always helped in the housekeeping chores that had to happen. So he was far from traditional in that sense. So I never thought of typical male or typical female jobs around the house. And later on in life, my Swedish boss, Tommy Sjödahl, has been a massive inspiration for who he is as a leader, but also for treating all the same, no matter gender, nationality, or what have you. So I think he's probably been my biggest influence positively there. So and from the rest, I pick up from everyone something. There are many conversations I'm having around during the day or in the year that I pick up some form of inspiration or think like, oh, that's actually pretty wise and pretty good. So it's a continuous learning and I love it.
Finally, Angela.
I would just echo that. My parents, of course, but I found that my inspiration changed depending on where I was looking next in my career or other people that I just might have met coincidentally. So whether it was someone who had a trait that I was really looking to lean into and learn, or one that I had been working on, or one that I had myself. So I don't necessarily think that inspiration has to be consistent with the same person all the way through your career, although my parents are two people that have been inspirational. But I thought that this was actually a difficult question because I thought of all the people that have inspired me. It's been a lot. I'm not sure that I can name them all.
Okay, so just as I say, just slightly maybe flipping that question in terms of what you as sort of senior women in the industry are doing in terms to inspire others and how that maybe influences your day-to-day activities. What are you doing to sort of maybe support people in terms of career progression, and specifically obviously women in the industry?
I'm lucky in that my role, since I'm helping to set and execute our strategy that includes I&D initiatives, training and development initiatives. So we've been helping our leadership team recognize unconscious bias. We've been helping our leadership team understand what are some of the best practices when it comes to pipelining talent, retaining talent, progressing talent. So looking at that hiring, promoting, exit data, and trying to find areas where we can do better. So I think when I reflect on what's my role, it's using my voice at the table, especially when we have specific conversations about how to continue to progress women. And then on a more personal basis, anytime I'm traveling to an office, I'm trying to meet with women, I'm trying to listen to their story, trying to share my own story if that's important for others, but just always challenging the organization, our teams, myself, and others to speak up, to take that leap when it seems a little bit too far, to find those allies who are going to help you take that leap of faith yourself.
Okay.
I think for me, it is the official mentorship programs that we have, that I'm mentoring a couple of our colleagues. But I have also seen that a lot of women do reach out to me to, informally ask for mentorship. This is because I have done a lot of changes in my career. I have left my home country, Turkey. I came to the UK market. I have left banking to join insurance. So that change element is probably something they want to hear more about. I do see a lot of women, questioning themselves whether they should do the next leap, changing, it's about mobility or whether it's about changing sectors. So I try to informally also mentor a lot of women. I must say that it's less with men. They don't come out to senior women leadership to ask for mentorship, but women are quite proactive with this, and this is really encouraging.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the same. Yeah, I see the same thing, Richard. Although it took quite some time for me to realize that I am a role model, because I never thought of myself as one. But I hear myself telling a lot of the stories that I'm currently sharing now in this webinar as well, because I'm being asked, so how do you do it, and what happened, and how did you combine a family and a career, etc. So it's answering those questions, and be curious about the stories of others, and to tap them on the shoulder. And it can be anywhere and everywhere. It can be in a very formal meeting where I reach out to in a sponsor program we're having in Atradius, or at the coffee machine. Hey, you're going to this meeting, what do you think? Well, I would, and then share an idea. I said, I would speak up and explain this in this meeting. So it's in various degrees, but I've become very aware. Early on in my career, I thought if you work hard and basically you progress, it's all going to be fine. But I've learned already some years ago that women need sometimes a little different approach, a tap on the shoulder, and a bit of encouragement, as I got encouragement during my career.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much to add really to what Angela and Özlem and Marty have said. I think it's in the day-to-day things. I think that's what I would echo with what a lot of the women have said. I think it's in the small engagements and the opportunities you have when you're talking to your people managers, some of whom will be men, to just give them a slightly different perspective, to kind of give them the female lens, and just sharing that, whether it comes to somebody who's being maybe put forward for a project, and perhaps you notice there's a couple of women from your team missing in that list, and making sure that you're questioning why, and if they haven't put their names forward, should we go and understand what's preventing them from doing that before just handing it over to the 2 or 3 men who perhaps have put their name in the ring. So I think it's just encouraging people leaders within the teams to just understand that there is a different lens for women sometimes, and it can be hugely rewarding if they're just prepared to dig a little bit deeper and understand perhaps what might be holding that female back. That's hugely important for me, and something I was really lucky to have throughout my career. So keep passing that message on, I think.
And if I can add one point, I think that's really helpful, is the way that we invite women to the table, we might need to change the approach. If you go to a woman and say, have you thought about this? It's a yes or no question. And they might say, well, no, because they hadn't thought about themselves in this project or in this role, rather than having the conversation of, I've seen that you've been able to develop this skill or this behavior. This is what's needed in this project or in this role. We can help you succeed there. Why don't we think about putting a plan in place or have a conversation about getting you to that next step, rather than have you thought about yourself there? And I think that sometimes that happens with conversations is it's a yes or no question. A woman says no, and the people manager says, well, I asked her and she wasn't interested. And that wasn't the question. It was, have you thought about this? Not, are you ready? Or how can we get you ready? How can we get you there?
And do you think that's still a challenge for the industry in general, that this sort of creating almost the vision of what the person can do and move forward, as opposed to it being a very, as you say, almost black and white yes or no question? It's building the picture, building that journey for them, and helping explain how they develop that journey. Is that an area that we need to do better?
Yes,
Lots of nodding heads.
Yes,
I
lots of
knew
heads.
it was a bit of a leading question.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
yes.
so. We have to, because I do believe that the next generation is not going to be as silent, and they expect different things. And otherwise, we're going to miss out on a lot of talent if we're not moving as an industry into a, more in a different way of operating and embracing diversity very much. Because my daughters will not take a no for an answer. I can tell you that. There's a different generation up and coming, luckily.
Yeah, I had my daughter commenting me the other day about a conference I'm going to attend in May. And she said, Mom, you are the only woman on the panel. And when I checked the overall conference, there were only 2 women. So I think equal representation is so key, and maybe it's going to be bold, but I don't want to attend an event where I'm the only woman. It's kind of feeling really lonely.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that we have to do collectively is to have this equal representation. And I agree that the new generation is looking for many different things. When they come for an interview, the questions that they ask you is all about, sustainability policies, diversity policies in the company, how as a woman you are advocating other women, and, many other topics that we wouldn't really speak about in our interviews in the past. So I'm really hopeful for what's coming ahead, and that we need to get ready for that.
Very good. Very good. So if you're going to summarize in terms of, and again, a question that we've been asked is, what key strengths have you built and to help you get to where you were today? And we've sort of covered some of that, obviously, with the discussion so far. But if there was just one thing you were going to say in terms of, this is important, and I want to get away from the sort of, I think Anna's phrase, the ambitious woman stereotype thing. So what is it that you would add say that this is the key thing that really has helped me and is my key strength? And I realise that's a very black and white question, but is there one thing that you would give advice to people and say, this is really seeing me through?
I think if I was to give myself advice as I look over my career and as I want to continue in the industry, it's pushing myself forward and being more imaginative than maybe what I would be when I take a look at what is the next step. Is why am I not looking 2 or 3 steps ahead and finding those allies who will push me and sponsor me and challenge me and encourage me to do that. And I think there have been times where I've looked back in my career and said, oh, why didn't I go for that? Or, oh, I should have pushed myself here. We need to try and make sure that we push through that barrier that we a lot of times set up for ourselves internally, that I'm not ready, or what else can I do in order to get there, and just go for it. So that would be something that I would like to continue to work on, and that I would challenge others. But I would also say that it's important for teams and people managers and leaders to recognize that this is the case, and it's a partnership. It's not just about the woman trying to break through an internal barrier that may or may not exist. There could be barriers that exist at the organization, and how can we remove some of those barriers so that it's easier for women to continue to grow and thrive in our organizations.
Okay. Would anyone like to add to that?
Well, it's a difficult question, Richard, to name one thing that basically pulled me through. I don't know. It's well, I think it helped a lot that I got to know myself and basically embraced myself for who I am, so that I don't longer have to be different or to act or anything like that. So become self-confident. And luckily, one of the good things about getting older, that's what you usually gain. So there's one advantage to that. So be happy with yourself, push yourself, but also don't be too harsh on yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to put words into the panel's discussion, but I think a key strength is knowing your weaknesses and admitting dealing with them, just to throw that one into the hat.
Yeah, I think what we do, I agree with you, Richard. What we do is that because our strengths come to us so easily, we don't call them strengths, right? Because, that's what you do naturally. And the weaknesses are something that you want to, improve so that they're not weaknesses anymore. And as women, we are very critical of ourselves. I think this was echoed by everybody in the panel today, that we look into our own weaknesses more than men do. And being aware of this and encouraging other women that it is okay not to be perfect and not to be ready for that role. And, I think the excitement is really the challenge itself, right? You go into a new role, you don't probably know everything about the role, but that's what builds your credibility over time, because you learn, you make mistakes. Maybe to encourage our colleagues that nobody is 100% perfect when they land on the next job. This is very natural.
I think, from my perspective of this discussion so far, I think that's been one of the very strong messages that's come out of this, that there isn't a one size fits all. You have to have this range of skills, etc., which, again, using that, there's a stereotype, you've got to be a certain type of way to be successful. And I think that's been quite a strong message that's come out of the discussion today, in sort of slightly summarizing earlier. So I think that's a good thing, that there's different ways, and I think we all have different strengths, and it is a very key message that seems to have come out of today's discussion, I think. I suppose we're now getting towards the end of the webinar, so I just sort of some degree wants to leave you with a chance to maybe make a final point. Do you have something that you feel you want to share and the way the discussion's gone, or would you like to summarize what we've discussed and what you think has come out of today's discussion?
I mean, the one thing I would say, just to perhaps sort of round up from my perspective, is I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a woman in our industry. I mean, we've still got, steps we need to make, and we're all moving towards that. This group that's been created, Women in Credit Insurance, I know is really excited about bringing together women and men to sort of tackle one of these challenges, and also bring events together and networking and mentoring. So I think there'll be more to come from this group, but it's really an exciting time, and I think that there's lots of opportunity for women who want to succeed in this industry. So I think it's it's great for everyone who's joined, and hopefully everyone's picked up a little something from one of us on the panel today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did benefit a lot from today's panel, listening to my panelist colleagues. I would say that hopefully our industry, the women in our industry, will be geared towards learning more about, what could help them, what tools they can use. It could be across institutions, so you don't have to only reach out to a colleague in your own company, but you could find a mentor in a completely different industry. Maybe that would give you a different perspective. And it's all about having more of these type of webinars, discussion points, and maybe reading and learning more about what could help you. But I do trust that the time is right, as Anna said, for women to progress further. At least we have a big realization around that this is what we should push for, so that we have equal representation in companies. So yeah, very happy to have the session today on this.
Good. Angela and Marty, would you any final comments?
Yeah, I was very happy that this webinar happened. So thank you for organizing and for creating this women in credit insurance. A little bit piece of advice, stand your ground, be confident, and even if you're the only one, make sure that you're there, you're visible, and speak up. So don't hold yourself back, ladies. You have something to say.
Well said. And finally, Angela.
And I would echo that, and feel free to reach out to any of us or any other women that you find inspiring, or men. It's always great to make connections, and I think we've found some of those opportunities that have been most fulfilling to us have been in collaboration and partnership with others. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel and to share some of the ideas with everyone today. And I look forward to meeting new faces and new people as we continue to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think we're at the stage now where we're just ready to conclude the webinar. So I'd like to thank all four of the panelists for attending and sharing their experiences and being open about the challenges and the opportunities that are in the industry. Hopefully we have inspired some of the younger generation to push on and state their case for equal representation of women throughout the industry. So that's what we want. And I do know that obviously we're looking to do more of these type events, more events planned for the women in credit. So I would ask people who are attending this webinar to obviously keep their eyes peeled for when those are being promoted and to attend those. So on that point, again, thank you to all the panelists, and I hope you have found this webinar of benefit. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.